The next topic is, does SEO still matter when AI can summarize everything? We are going to be calling two amazing panelists to the stage. Today we're going to be having Harsha Mokkarala. He is the CEO and founder of EQ. And then we're also going to have Rick Saake, who is the head of digital results. Let's call them up to the stage and give them a big round of applause.
How are you, Rick?
Why don't you introduce ourselves so we can tell people a little bit about what we do and our expertise?
Perfect. So my name is Harsha Mokkarala. I am the CEO and founder of EQ. I have a long, decades-long experience running and scaling go-to-market shops, multiple times in my career. And EQ is very focused on helping go-to-market leaders build confidence in their data and analytical sort of abilities by using agentic AI to deliver virtual data science teams for them.
And my name is Rick Saake. Again, I'm the head of digital at Digital Results. I kind of laughed when I first saw this topic as something that we could go about. I went back and checked. Since 2007, I have spoke on the subject of, is SEO going to die or is SEO dead, 10 times. And as we all know, it hasn't really gone down at all. So we also went back and we researched how much more is being spent by businesses now than in 2007 when I first started speaking on this subject matter. And right now, businesses are spending 57 times more than they were in 2007 on SEO. And when you equate that back with like inflation and calculate, it's still over 40 times larger in the amount of money. So every time everybody says is SEO is going to die, SEO is dead, the opposite seems to happen. People find that they need to spend more. So this morning we sat down a little bit earlier and started kind of thinking through the processes on here, and we kind of broke it down into a couple different areas that we wanted to talk about. But the biggest thing is search really going anywhere? Is it going to disappear or not? And so what did you think?
Yeah, I love even the framing, right? Even if you think about it purely from a capital allocation perspective, where would I spend my dollars, right? Sort of, paid marketing, affiliates, all kinds of other tactics, versus lonely poor SEO, right? Where a $50,000, $100,000 bet on sort of, a little bit of sort of resourcing against that could be such multiplicative value. The fact that question keeps coming up as to whether, whatever shape or form SEO takes in the future, sort of this thing of it, the fact that question even keeps coming up makes me wonder if people are thinking about capital allocation the right way when it comes to sort of all of these things, all the sort of digital in this thing for sure. But at least in my mind, search is not going anywhere. We've had multiple iterations of what has happened, with search. I still remember when search was not just Google, it was, Lycos and Alta Vista and Yahoo and directory services and that kind of thing, to all the complexities of universal search and localized search and all of that kind of thing that came with Google, over the years. We are just in a new user experience. We are moving from the click on the blue link to sort of read a lot and figure out the citation and go check out what that brand has to say kind of phase of searching for information. But I don't think search is going anywhere. Ergo, I don't think sort of the need to optimize for showing up well in search results is going anywhere from just a tactics and investment perspective.
So our agency started doing some research specifically because we kept hearing how AI was, everyone was using AI for every search that was going on. And so we went and started doing some analysis of the last quarter. And over the last quarter, we looked at a little over 3 billion searches that were done on AI. We looked at them over hundreds of thousands of businesses that were being done, and we found some very interesting information. Again, we won't talk about in these numbers anything from on the Google that's actually appearing on the search results itself, but we do include ChatGPT, Gemini searches, Perplexity. So ChatGPT was leading overall off of those 3 billion searches. 78% of the searches that were being done from an AI were done on ChatGPT. Gemini had 8.65%, Perplexity 7%, and Microsoft Copilot had 3.9%. Claude 2.91, and DeepSeek was 0.02%, so a very, very small number. But I have a question for you.
Yes.
What percent of all searches going on were actually AI searches in that same quarter of 26?
You said the number was, this was 3 billion?
So this was, we just looked at 3 billion, because I mean, you got to cut it off some, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise we'd spend all kinds of money doing the analysis
I
on
don't
this.
know, 2%, Rick, something like that, like, 5%, like something like that.
Yeah, you're really close. It was, believe it or not, AI only equated for 3.2% of actual searches that were being done on the web during that quarter. And so when you equate all of that back, ChatGPT is at 2.5%, which puts it behind even Bing for searches,
totally
or
right.
behind YouTube. Gemini is 0.28%. It goes all the way out to DeepSeek, 0.0006% for DeepSeek. So we're talking about very small numbers now. Obviously, the numbers will continue to grow, but SEO and the regular search that's going on is still going to impact it. But we know that there are certain things that do come about when AI is incorporated into some of the search results.
Totally. I think like I know those numbers don't include the search snippet that comes up when you search on Google, for example.
Correct.
The real, I think the place where the real sort of freak out, if you will, comes here, as I've seen, is that sort of brands are losing traffic.
Absolutely.
Somewhat to the fact that that AI snippet now takes away from that traditional user experience of somebody searching and going and clicking on the listing, either the paid listing or the organic listing, sort of on the page, if you will. I think that's a reality, and that's something you have to react to and all that. But again, remember who's doing that, right? Sort of, the entire SEO industry is built on optimizing to Google. And guess who's probably going to be the largest of sort of the AI search kind of this thing? It's Google with the Gemini listing at the very top. And guess what? Actually, is probably at the most premium. I remember these memes where like, you had content is king with like a little crown on top of the content on the C. Hey, content is now, I don't know, Emperor Donald Trump, whatever you want to call it. Like, content is now even bigger as an influence just because of like what Google is doing with that sort of snippet at the very top. I really think the disruption comes from that user experience, then like natively people going and seeking out sort of these AI engines for like at least their primary search, their first search, or their sort of starting point, if you will.
Yes, and definitely depending on the type of searches that they're doing. If it's informational searches, a lot of these AI searches or AI tools within search results, so your AI overviews, AI modes, things like that, are getting to be very, very popular. In fact, Google's CEO just spoke about it last week, and they were asking him all kinds of questions. Of course, just like when we're at these conferences, they want to know, 5 years from now, where is AI going to be with search? And he said, basically went back to him, he says, we can tell you where it's probably going to be 8 months to 12 months out. And that's the closest we can give you on those. And he says, even that is a lot of guessing that's going on.
Totally.
So, I mean, that happens. But I will say, definitely we're seeing a lot more of what we refer to as zero-click, where people are doing a search and they're getting enough information from the search results. And again, Google has touted themselves over the last several years as being the answer engine, not necessarily a search engine, because the goal is to get their end user the information they're looking for. And so that whole journey through search is being modified and changed. And so that whole process goes through. There was another report that Google did and put out earlier this year. Actually, it was the end of last year in 2025. But for people that actually did AI searches, those people were getting like information coming across it, but they were able to go back and see if they did an AI search, what happened later on. And they found that 97% of those searches ended up coming back to doing more of an organic search for the process of purchasing. So purchases were definitely much more of that lean in, I'm looking for something specific.
Completely.
Where, and I think they were using an example of if somebody was trying to find out the best kinds of shoes for running, and somebody was just started running, they were looking at these shoes, they gave an example, and there was a lot of that AI search that was going on for what's the best kind of shoe to have if you run, if I have, plantar fasciitis, what do I need to do, those types of things. But then when it came to the point of actually purchasing,
that's right.
They went and did what we refer to as that blue link, coming through, clicking on the blue link, going and purchasing it. So I think there's a lot of changes that way in kind of as it's going through. But from businesses, and especially, I always think about like C-suites wanting to have information, and then KPIs are all built out and everybody's reporting up the line. There are huge changes to what really is important, right?
Totally.
It used to always be number of keywords, how many impressions, how many clicks we were getting, how many conversions from that were coming. And now with a lot of this zero click going on, they're seeing organic traffic sometimes drop.
Yep.
Conversions still holding strong, but they see these numbers softening, and anybody that's atop of a business sees a number going in the negative direction is always going to have those concerns, right? Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you see, when you're talking with businesses and what it is that they need to be looking at.
Totally. If you think about it, like this is, if you think about the place where both the AI summaries, but generally speaking, AI search, I think, is beginning to show up a lot more. It's in that long tail kind of category, right? Sort of, the head terms is fine. Your branded search is not going anywhere. Like, however, whatever somebody throws at the way, somebody searching for your brand term will want to come to your website and sort of check what you have out and that kind of thing, for example. So it is really a question of metrics and KPIs and tracking and what you prioritize and that kind of thing, both on, like, to your point, sort of top level things like, number of keywords you rank for, impressions, clicks, those kinds of things, but also in the very detailed SEO things that we used to track, from an SEO perspective, right? So, whether it was backlinks or domain authorities, mm-hmm. or trust flows and all of these other sort of metrics that we all sort of used to track. From an SEO perspective, a whole bunch of that stuff is sort of up in the air all of a sudden as we go through another round of disruption. We've not seen every 2 years, every time Google updates an algorithm and says, hey, blah is now a bigger factor in the search index than it used to be, for example. I don't think this is new for anyone who's been, in this kind of space, if you will. But I think the obsession with those very big top level metrics has to change, right? A click was never the same. A click to a long tail keyword that leads to a blog post was never the same as a click to sort of a branded term that sort of led to a storefront or led to a purchase page or something like that, for example. Right. And the more you obsess about that, the more you're actually losing focus on what's actually happening with this kind of consumer behavior, if you will. And I think the brands that sort of get that right in terms of thinking through, hey, where am I getting value for and how do I optimize that? And then where was I getting traffic from? And how do I actually figure out how to get traffic again, right? To the extent traffic is an important metric, not that I'm not saying it is, but how do I actually sort of regain some of that kind of traffic mojo back? I think sort of that's a shift that organizations will have to make, right. And that's a tooling that organizations will have to think about. And then there's new tooling to be built, entirely new tooling to be built around how you actually measure your presence within the AI search category. So when hey, when somebody searches for shoes, if I'm Nike the brand, do my shoes show up in the plantar fasciitis category or not? Right. And what do I need to do content-wise to make sure that does happen? There's now an entirely new set of instrumentation that I believe brands will have to think through on how to put that together. Right. And in that space, you're absolutely right. Odds are none of these platforms, even if you went and asked OpenAI how they'd how they would be thinking about opening up that type of visibility. It took Google a while to open up that kind of visibility to SEOs for us to optimize to things like the page rank, what was called the page rank back then, and those kinds of things. These platforms will have to figure out how they expose that kind of information, how they monetize those clicks, like all of that kind of thing. Forget the book is not yet written. I think the cover page is not yet there in terms of like how to think about these things.
Yeah, I would say that definitely we've had these discussions over the last couple of years with clients, and talking to them about focusing on more business objectives. For those things where if your business, people would always come to us as an agency and say, I need more organic traffic. And I mean, that was the very common thing that we would hear in meetings, when we do consultations with people. And I would look at them and I say, you don't need more organic traffic. And of course, that shocks everybody. SEO person should be talking organic, right? And I would always look at them and say, what you need to be focusing on your business goals.
Totally.
So if your business is to sell more product, if I could provide you less people and sell more product, would you be happy? And of course, every one of them are like, well, absolutely, that's the case. And I said, then you just have said you don't need more organic traffic, you need better converting traffic. And so that then comes back to what things are going to drive people through that ultimate conversion. And a lot of the AI stuff we're seeing is very high funnel. We still see PPC, SEO for specific types of pages being very driven for that lower funnel. And then there's plenty of everything with display and video and everything like that tends to be more in the middle realm area. And so we've talked with clients. Their first thing is, well, how do we track AI? And so it's really funny. We're using AI tools to track AI in search and come through. And so we've found that two of the biggest factors that we look at are for the topics that they could rank for, what's your share of voice? So, if you could rank for 150 different spots and you're only ranking for 15 and you have a 10% share of voice, that's a problem, because that means you're losing out on a whole lot of other areas. And then the other one is when people are talking about you in AI, how is that?
Yep.
What is the sentiment?
Sentiment, yep.
And so, and sentiments are, is it positive, neutral, negative? In a lot of places, their sentiment is terrible, but they have a great share of voice. Well, that's terrible because everybody that's seen stuff in AI about you has seen terrible stuff about you.
Totally.
So the pushing the needles in different directions is, where are you at with your share of voice? How do we grow that? Where are you at for your sentiment? And how do we grow that as well? Because we want to be seen more often, but we also want to be seen in a very positive light, not even a neutral or negative light.
In the right places. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not like AI does hallucinate. I'm not saying it doesn't, but any mentions of your brand, any sort of content related to your brand that shows up in one of these AI searches, it's not like it's made up, right? It's sourcing these things from, I don't know, Reddit or a Quora or a forum somewhere else or something like that, for example. The mentions of your brand are out there, and these things sort of pick those up to begin with anyways. We've done some work where, we can build, we can sort of sample and tell you sort of for every X number of sort of AI searches related to your product, your category, that kind of thing. What do you show up in? What kinds of keywords do you show up in? Like that kind of thing. Again, the depth of data that is required to really understand this is just not there. We are still, we're still at the platform's mercy, and we're still at sort of almost like sample mercy, if you will, as opposed to like real volumes on what is going on. What is going on these things? So again, if I were a brand thinking about this right now, what I would do is start to contemplate these problems, start to work with partners who can at least sort of give you ideas, build some basic frameworks that you can measure against, but know that you have to be very nimble, and these things will change very, very quickly as new data gets introduced. I don't know, if you remember the time when Google stopped, you stopped getting the actual search term on the organic sort of this thing because, they said privacy or whatever that was, whatever the reason was, that Google stopped giving you the actual search term back from a search, and so
they hid it
suddenly
from us.
you hid it from us, exactly right. And suddenly you lost what was one of the most important sources of intel for you as to what keywords and what long tail search term and that kind of thing. For example, we are like, forget losing data. We're at the point where we don't even have the beginnings of that kind of data today. And I think like we just have to wait and watch to see where this space goes. Like again, the SEO question, SEO has been around for 25 years, right? 30 years probably, like maybe longer. We are in year 2 of this consumer behavior. We kind of have a lot to figure out still before we go anywhere with it.
So we also talked this morning about what types of businesses are going to be successful and what kind of businesses are going to fail.
Yeah, I think like one thing is very clear, right? Like brand strength is now sort of hyper important, right?
Absolutely.
Like the strength of your brand and how your brand is perceived becomes like all the way more important, right? Like yay for the old-fashioned marketing strategists, brand marketers, all of that kind of thing. Nay for like quant jocks like me even in some ways. But like brand strength becomes very very important. But the other piece that I think a lot of organizations don't quite understand and ignore is the more proprietary data and information you have that you can actually shape into content, into value add for the world, the more likely you are to win in this brave new era, right? One of the examples we talked about this morning, Rick, as well was, we have a company that, we've done some work with who, they run security systems at buildings. And they don't even realize this, but they have a proprietary data set that is office occupancy.
Great.
Now, nobody else has that data. You have that data. So like, how do you weaponize that and make that into a thing that you can actually put out into the world,
right,
such that like the engines are the AI engines are sort of picking that up, and your brand therefore shows up as an authoritative source. The ones that will win here, beyond the ones that have that sort of the ability to build brand recognition, are those who can take their proprietary data, their proprietary information, and really weaponize that into content, value-added content that can drive visibility for them.
Yeah. Back in the 80s, there used to be this statement is, your brand is not what you tell people it is. Your brand is what people tell your brand is. And I think that's becoming all the more important in this area as well. And first-party information, first-party data that you've got that you can share out on a website is awesome. Places that have found and are applying XML databases in the back end so that when a page is loaded, a person sees basically half of the information that's sitting in that code, and that code can have all kinds of information. So we work with a company that does laboratory specialty needles, syringes, robotic systems, and they've got, when you start adding all of the different components and how you can add things together, and I mean, I'm just glad I don't have to manage that in the back office, trying to figure out where everything's at. But they now in their data layer are pushing out information, and AI is picking it up so that they'll do searches for specific types of needles with a specific syringe attachment that's used for genetic testing. And they pop up almost instantaneously because they've fed it information, they've fed it keywords, they've fed it about what those types of products are. And now they're selling things that are going through that process. I mean, they're excited because they've got some of these large robotic systems that, they can cost up to $500,000 a piece.
Totally.
And they sell one of those and it comes back and, hey, I got that sale through ChatGPT. They're going to be investing all the more into adding to it. So we get those questions like, what should we be doing next? What should we be adding to?
The one other thing I'll say, Rick, is it used to be an SEO tactic. If you remember back in the day, a company like Bazaar Voice used to sell you sort of the notion of doing ratings and reviews on your site because that was sort of good user-generated content that would help with sort of search and that kind of thing. Whether that is still a thing or not, I think like as a brand, you participating in forums like Reddit and other places where you're seeding conversation, you're responding to conversation, you're present where your users are. Again, sort of old-fashioned block and tackle sort of marketing, but I would totally go back and look at those kinds of things as well. I mean, one of the big winners off of the of the AI summarization are those forums, and like we can't ignore that anymore. That's not just for the, wild mob masses, that sort of most marketers would look askance at, like with things like Reddit, for example.
Yeah, well, one of the sessions this morning that we were hearing, one of the teams had taken and rather than just letting people put their own reviews in, they basically gave them fed in options. You can select from, like if you want to write a review, that's great, but we have 10 preset ones here that you can choose from and edit to your will. And so it was already fed with keywords. It was fed with very positive terms. All those things are being used, and then they were pulling that onto their website, and then they had XML database for that available. Of course, search engines and AI systems are pulling all of that information because they love it. And I would say those are awesome to see as well. I also know, you mentioned, content is king, emperor, everything else, and we have seen modification over time about how content needs to be written. So content originally was written for the end user in mind, and so we had great content writers that would just write to, whatever you could give them topics, they would write, information that needed to be done, and then we started realizing that you had two audiences that you had to write to, the end audience, but you also had to write to big search engines like Google, right? And so there was, how do I write content with hierarchy tags and making sure that all of my images have alt attributes and what's my schema look like and what, all of that type of information is being put in. And so that was, there was always tools that we would use to help us determine, are you writing well for the end user? So reading level, Fleisch-Kincaid scores, what kind of length is on there, but then also what are those semantic words that Google is seeing on there, those that are on page 1, and are they included in your content or not? And now we've gotten this third audience that's now in, and we've got agentic systems that we're starting to look at of how do we get information in? And if you'll notice that, like if you do AI searches, a lot of the information comes out as bullet points, very short and to the point. And so, we used to go through these processes with our staff where you'd go through and you'd find out if they were a thinker, a knower, or feeler, right? And so if it was a thinker, that person needed the bullet points. The knower, it was like, I'm going to make a decision. It's a short paragraph. It's in there. And then the feeler, like if you're writing an email to a feeler, it is going to be a long form, needs to go back to the original thought process and bring them all the way through. And so it's almost like that now that whenever we write content, we've got to be trying to write to 3 different audiences the same way of like, that feeler is the end audience, the knower is Google, and the thinkers then are those bullet points that are going into agentic systems. And so as we're writing content, we're going back and looking at pages that aren't ranking for things. And we say, well, we've got great content about this, but it just may not be written in the right way. And agentic systems aren't pulling that in necessarily.
Totally. Things like FAQs, things like, how to type content, in some ways though, I think the thing I love is it's entirely possible that those two things, the write for the engine and write for the agent, I think we can coin those actually, like write for the engine, write for the agent. I think those two will converge. And if anything, like hopefully that'll make the write to the engine feel more human than it used to be, where that was sort of a very mechanized, hey, I'm almost not writing for readership here. I'm almost writing for sort of the mechanics of writing content here, if you will. I'm actually excited that there's potentially sort of, a return back to good customer experience, good levels of, the right level of language, the right level of, those kinds of things. And, the other thing that is really neat is, I think the importance of things like citations, the importance of really things like, if you're quoting statistics like citations and, references and those kinds of things, I think that will become a lot more important. And as somebody who's very, very data sort of oriented, I love that. I think the world is today full of, sort of fake content that we can't find references for and that kind of thing. And this will force all of us to do a little bit more sort of rigor around sort of what we put out. I actually think that's a very, very positive sort of this thing. So I'm actually quite hopeful that the quality of content in the world is going to get better. Though, like we we will wade through a whole bunch of slop before we get there.
That's right.
But but I think the general direction of this, I think I quite like.
Well, the last algorithm update that Google just did in March, it was all about getting rid of spammy stuff that was getting put out there. I mean, you would have sites that would push out 1,000 pieces of content that were just mush garbage that was out there, and yes, it was a lot of pages. They weren't ranking well, but they just made everything kind of be a mixture. And their whole sites have been penalized, and so they're no longer appearing. And it's in a lot of we saw a lot of things like affiliate sites, and where they were trying to gain revenue from those type of things were appearing into those, or sites that were more, I want to call them link farms, but
you call them link farms, I'm sure.
There are pages with way too many links on them that don't need to be out there. And so I definitely think that they're looking at, with as much AI content that's being produced, how do we go back and how do we pull in and find what's good AI content. So like on our end, in all of our processes, we use AI for all kinds of things, but there's always a human in that process kind of reviewing things. My content writers have now become content editors. They've moved from that process of, hey, I want to just write content, and now they're using tools to find out what kind of content do they need to have on the page, and in order to rank, what are the SEO terms that I need to be going at, the semantics and all of that, and then they bring that in and they say, okay, besides that, what are the people also ask, and then building that out. You mentioned all like FAQs, how-tos, all those types of things, making sure that not only do you have the copy on the page, but that you're writing schema that is in the back end, because schema is getting grabbed by search engines, getting grabbed by AI engines, and they're pulling that in and using that directly to rank pages. And there's a lot of people right now that, like my clients are up against, and they have very similar content, but because we have schema on pages and we've got data layer information, they're actually ranking in the AI, and their competitors are not.
Totally. Discipline, right? Like, same way, like, I think this is sort of the new avatar, if you will, of what used to be sort of technical SEO in terms of like, site stuff, user experience stuff. This is kind of what I think that is going to begin to look like more and more. I think like certain categories, if you're in things like travel, or if you're in certain categories like that, all the more how do you not sort of hide, again, what is proprietary data that you probably have that you can now surface through that kind of sort of more mechanized ways, for example. I think that becomes way more important. But I think that like it's changing, but it's not going away anywhere. It's not like people will stop looking for information. Right?
No, that information will always be around. So our last thing that we had talked about was executives. So we get a lot of information that's fed up to us, right? So what are some of the things as you as an executive you'd like to see in a report that gets to you? And then I'll give some of the things I think.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I really think like the major change that we'll go through here is the kind of change we talked about, where sort of quality becomes a lot more important, or as important as quantity does, or at least like gradation becomes that much more important than sort of quantity, for example, right? So I don't want to see an SEO report that is like, or an organic report that is just sort of listing out for me like page views and clicks and that kind of thing, for example. I want to see it now broken out by those kinds of factors, right? I want interpretation in terms of, again, what are the kinds of keywords that are sort of gaining ground and what are not? Because again, fundamentally, I believe this is going to change how search itself works, as in like, what am I as a user searching for?
Right.
Not just sort of what am I as a user sort of finding, if you will, in terms of traffic, for example. So I want to see movers and shakers in terms of like, what are categories of search, categories of sort of behavior that are genuinely changing in terms of going up and going down as as volumes and those kinds of things go, for example. And then the last thing I'll say is, Google's always talked about sort of personalized search, and everyone's search results are different and that kind of thing. We are now very much at the bleeding edge of that. I think we're sort of fully leaning into that. So another one that I would ask my teams to sort of report on if we were looking at sort of this kind of thing is more of that type of contextual sort of information. Don't show me my national ranking. Tell me sort of how I'm ranking in my key markets. Show me what's happening to volume in sort of specific places, that kind of thing. For example, I think I would heavily emphasize, as I said, quality over quantity in terms of this type of reportage than what used to be sort of very much an old-fashioned big ass funnel view of like big numbers across the funnel.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd also like to see where I'm at against all my comp set, especially in AI. So instead of just saying, hey, do I show up on AI? That's like a baby step to me of like what you should even be checking. But what's the sentiment out there about me? What is it against my competitors? And then what's my share of voice? Those things are going to be the biggest things because we're up against the comp set all the time looking for where we're going to grow our businesses, right? I loved your idea about by channel and finding the information out by geo. Where are my top people coming from? And not just traffic, but most importantly, for those things that matter. So, key events, conversions, those types of areas that I'd be looking for. Where are my sales ultimately coming from? And it may be that when you're kind of looking at attribution models and things like that about where somebody starts an engagement and ends an engagement, how do I get in there and how do I have them at so many touch points? I think we're going to see a lot of the beginning touch points being in your AI search as a very informational and getting that kind of lead. And then at the other end, where do we see them spend the great amount of time to actually convert out of? I think that those types of things will push the envelope and go in the direction. The last thing I would want to see from people is I would want to see from like what are the next things that are the plan for us to get to that next step. So if you find that there's a gap in a certain subject matter in AI that we need to be talking about, what's the plan in the next quarter to fill that gap? Or even if it's like, hey, we've got the next 2 quarters filled up, what's the plan that's going through? And then I can also look as like previous months or previous quarters, the information that's come through. What did that do for us? Did it keep moving the needle in the right direction? Because I think that there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to be happening in this area. I think track all of the information you can. Use tools that are out there. There's some great ones that are coming onto the market now that are just starting to get to the agentic side and give us a whole lot more insights. And I can only imagine that as AI is helping track AI, we're going to get even better information in the long run, especially the amount of data that's out there about website traffic and conversions and things like that. So
I can't wait. I can't wait for us to sub out I used to call them when my boss would ask for sort of give me impressions and clicks, I would say those are my soul killer. That would be my soul killer dashboard, right? Like every time I report on those numbers, a little bit of me dies, right? Like
sure.
I can't wait to get away from that to sort of more quality, more meaning behind our data, behind our information than not. Like,
I know we got I think 2 minutes left. So I want you to look forward 8 months to a year, and I want you to tell me one thing that you think will happen within search and AI specifically.
Yeah, I think we are less in that kind of time horizon away before at least sort of both Google through the sort of Gemini sort of summarization and ChatGPT will move towards sort of more aggressive monetization of the sort of search snippet in terms of sort of how that drives value for them and sort of how sort of brands can sort of influence that, play in there, that kind of thing, for example. So in some ways, I'm saying that both as I'm excited about what that could be in terms of a new channel and a new place to optimize against, that kind of thing, but also that there's an 8-12 month window maybe of pristine data and pristine sort of result here that gives all of us a chance to play around with a whole lot, right? But it can't be long before all of these large companies are pressed to monetize that stuff. And I think we are very much on the precipice of that over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I would say the other thing I think Google will finally figure out how to better include blue links in AI overviews in AI mode, and that they will also figure out monetization within those areas. I think that that's an area that they are just chomping at the bit at getting into. I think that we've seen some things coming in from like ChatGPT. We've been beta testing some of their ad platform areas. I don't think it's as bad as Claude made it out to be, but you know, how to see and where paid is going to come into those as well, I think will be interesting.
Totally.
Well, we want to thank everybody for letting us speak today on this subject matter. Obviously, we don't think SEO is going anywhere. It's obviously growing. It's fragmenting and it's going in different directions. But it's one of those things that, you know, I've been doing this a long time. People refer to me as Yoda because I've been doing SEO for so long. So I think that for both of us, you can reach out to either of us if you have more questions, because we didn't get to the questions today. But we will be glad to answer those and get back to you.
Thank you so much. Really nice talking to you.
Thank you.